What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast. I am your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, the host of the currently in development Nonsense Zone podcast, Andy B. What's going on, Andy? How are you?
Hey, pleasure to be here.
Awesome.
Ready to talk about some Bears. Don't get to do that here very often, so
very cool.
It's exciting
very cool.
for me.
Yeah, for sure. So before we jump in, why don't you tell us a little bit about the podcast that you're working on and the one that's in development here?
So it's just I think Nonsense sums it up pretty well. It's just me and my co-host, and we're trying to get some guests on board and just have some fun. We'll have some topics. Obviously, depends on who the guest is. There will be no hardball questions. It'll all be just me shooting layups for people and setting them up to be funny. Because while I may be funny at times, I find that I'm better at setting other people up. So I'm the straight man.
I like it. You're the quarterback. I like it.
Yes,
I like it.
Exactly.
Okay. So today's topic is about the top 3 what-ifs in Chicago Bears history. So as you can tell from Andy's outfit, he is a big Bears fan. I am not a Bears fan, but I like this hat, and I have a lot of Bears fan family. So I will be repping them.
I appreciate the effort
as well. Yeah. So as I said, this is going to be about the top 3 what-ifs in Chicago Bears history. We're going to try to focus on more 50-50 coin flip type scenarios, not big pie in the sky. What if the Bears were in Green Bay, or what if they were in Milwaukee or something like that? We're going to talk about scenarios where we can see pretty clearly both outcomes, and we'll talk about how or what the impact would have been on the team's history, the legacy, all that good stuff. So Andy's going to go first, and I'll follow up after that. So Andy, what is your number one what if in Chicago Bears history?
So I'm going to say, what if in 1986, after the Bears' legendary trip to Super Bowl 20, if they had chosen to stick with Buddy Ryan over Mike Ditka? So there's backstory here. Obviously, Buddy Ryan went for a head coaching job. That's why he left. Also, for those that don't follow the Bears closely, you may not know, Buddy Ryan and Mike Ditka did not like each other. Buddy Ryan, the legendary defensive coordinator that made that dominant defense what it was also the defensive coordinator for the Neil Armstrong-led Chicago Bears. And then Neil Armstrong was fired in 1982. The players on defense wrote a letter to George Halas, who was still running the show, but not really that in tune with anything at that point because he was quite an old man. He assured the Bears players that I'm going to get the name wrong. I think it was Buddy Parsons was completely safe. He didn't seem to know who Buddy Ryan was, basically.
Okay.
And they were asking, hey, if you're going to hire a head coach, we think it should be Buddy Ryan. Obviously, they didn't go that direction. They hired Mike Ditka. Mike Ditka had his own defensive coordinator in mind, but Halas did say, hey, this Buddy guy should probably do it. That's what the players want. And the rest is history. Mike Ditka wanted to run a Dallas Cowboys-esque defense. Not being a Cowboys fan, I don't know what kind of a defense they ran in the early 80s. But I know he was an assistant coach and a former player for the Cowboys, along with being a former Bear. And so he had strong ties to the Cowboys. He lists the Cowboys head coach, who's escaping me, legendary one with the hat. Tom Landry. He lists Tom Landry as his mentor. And anyways, so that's where it stems from. They got along for a while. Buddy's defenses carried the way. Now, Mike Ditka, very probably not a popular thing to say with Bears fans, but Mike Ditka wasn't a good coach.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I will say there are scheme coaches and then there are rah-rah coaches. And Ditka was definitely a rah-rah coach. And in that regard, he was good. He knew how to get his players amped up. But that defense, I mean, they've never, even to current Super Bowl levels, you've never seen a Super Bowl end with them picking up the defensive coordinator and carrying him off the field like the 85 Bears did.
Wow.
And that shows where their heart was. So, and then to throw on top of that some of the questionable decisions that Ditka has made through the years in his Bears time and once he went to the Saints. He basically chased Jim McMahon out of town.
Yeah.
And then, okay, I don't have a problem with that, although I am a huge Jim McMahon fan.
Mhm.
But if you have a replacement in mind that's better, okay. But he went through Doug Flutie, he went through Jim Harbaugh, through Mike Tomczak, through Steve Fuller, and he couldn't stick with any of them. You know, as soon as one of them had a bad game, you're on the bench, calling the other guy up. So some of the decisions that were made after he left the Bears when he went to the Saints, trading the entire draft away for Ricky Williams. That's more of a GM, but
that.
still. And
Same
then
idea.
he had, you know, the same quarterback problems there. He had Heath Schuler, Danny Werfel, a guy named Doug Nussmeier, who's actually a coach in the NFL now. And he couldn't stick with any of them. So it's just, you know, love Mike Ditka to death. Don't get me wrong.
What do you think would have happened if they had kept Buddy Ryan? I think Buddy Ryan went to Houston later after this job, right? Or was it Philly?
He was hired by the Philadelphia Eagles.
Philly, that's right.
He was their head coach, and you actually watched a lot of those those Bears players go to the Eagles afterwards. So all I'm saying is maybe another Super Bowl. I don't think they would have been a dynasty, but the Bears defense continued to be successful after Buddy Ryan left because of all the talent that they had, but they never reached those levels like they did in 85. And I just feel like it was maybe, and this is an emotional, spin, but I feel like maybe it was because their heart was with Buddy. Buddy was the one that really got them charged up and raring to go.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know about this. I didn't know that. Obviously I knew about Buddy Ryan and the famous things like the 4-6 defense, and of course the 85 Bears with arguably the greatest defense in the history of the NFL. I didn't know that they had that choice to make, and I thought Ditka was kind of a legendary guy, much beloved. I didn't know there were Bears fans that didn't really like him. So this is interesting.
I don't want to go. I don't want to say I don't like Mike Ditka. I love Mike Ditka. I just don't think he was a great coach. That's
that's a good distinction. Yeah.
Okay. And so just not to walk this one into the dirt too much, but there's just look at the players that followed. Look at so famously, Buddy Ryan told the team before Super Bowl 20, hey, I've accepted a job in Philadelphia to be their head coach. It was on record that most of the defense was in tears. Big, strong, the 85 Bears defense were crying because their defensive coordinator was leaving. Yeah, it just shows that they wanted to play for Buddy. And I think that, like I said, the talent was there. Maybe the heart wasn't as much.
Yeah.
Once he was gone.
Maybe the rest of the 80s go a little bit different for the Bears in this case.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead with my number one. This is something that I had no idea about until I was doing research for this podcast. But apparently, back in the days in the NFL, if two teams had an identical record, the tiebreaker in the draft, instead of strength of schedule or head to head or whatever it is, was determined by a literal coin flip. I know the NBA used to do this back in the day as well. So apparently, I believe it was 1970, Terry Bradshaw was the number one pick, and the Bears and the Steelers had an identical 1-13 record. The Bears had beaten the Steelers that year, so the Steelers should have had the pick anyway, according to the tiebreaker rules. But anyway, they did a coin flip for the rights to draft Terry Bradshaw. And of course, as we all know, the Steelers won that flip, drafted Terry Bradshaw. And I think not only is this a huge Bears what if, but it's just a huge what if in NFL history. Like, do we still get the Steel Curtain dynasty? Do we still get those legendary Steelers teams where they won 4 Super Bowls in the 70s? But for the Bears, a team that has struggled probably since, I don't know, Sid Luckman or something, to have a great quarterback. I don't want to say above average, but a great quarterback. They would have gotten one, in the 1970s. And who would have thought that a guy from Louisiana would have been a perfect, like, tough, cold weather guy, because he did well in Pittsburgh, would have done probably just as well in Chicago. And I'm just looking back at his numbers. I mean, just kind of an aside, but his numbers are hilarious. Like, he led the league at one point with 17 touchdowns. He led the league with 3,700 yards at some point, and for his career, he has 212 touchdowns and 210 interceptions. But it's just kind of a mark of the times, I should say. And I also found that the Bears have not had an All-Pro quarterback since the AFL-NFL merger. So with one coin flip, they would have checked all those boxes. Maybe not a 4,000-yard quarterback, but they would have gotten an All-Pro, Hall of Fame, legendary quarterback who was incredible for the era that he was playing. And did you know about this coin flip?
I did know about the coin flip. Yeah. Of course, I haven't studied this too much. My understanding of Terry Bradshaw was that he was a good quarterback on great defensive teams, much like my favorite Jim McMahon. He was just, Terry Bradshaw has 4 Super Bowls. Don't get me wrong. He's Jim McMahon here, Terry Bradshaw here. But, I think the biggest problem the Bears had at the time, well, the problem they still have, but back then the problem was the offensive line. I think they had a notoriously bad offensive line throughout the 70s, and they had some quarterbacks like Vince Evans and Bob Avonlea that had some talent but never really amounted to much. I think the biggest problem the Bears have is that they're not owned by football people. George Halas being the exception, but so it wasn't so much a problem then as it is now. So I'm kind of getting off track here.
Okay. So you're saying that Terry Bradshaw, I think, he's not the same guy in Chicago, basically?
I think quarterbacks by and large are a product of the team that they're on. And if you put Terry Bradshaw on a bad team, I think you get a quarterback that may not be in the Hall of Fame. He might have made a Pro Bowl or All Pro. I don't even know if they had Pro Bowls in the early 70s. But
sure
they did? Okay. But that would probably be my take.
Okay. I think that's fair. I mean, it's I think it might be a little dismissive of Bradshaw. I'm sure he gets it all the time because he did play on, these incredible teams. But to be fair to him, the Steelers were probably one of the worst teams in the league, in the 60s, and, yeah, exactly. And for a long time, they were kind of a joke of a franchise until those Terry Bradshaw, Mean Joe Green, all those guys. So, it's
Bradshaw did throw a lot of interceptions. I was going to make reference because I think Bradshaw. I thought Bradshaw. I was wrong because you just proved me wrong on the stats that you read off. But I was thinking that he finished his career with more interceptions than touchdowns, but it was close.
You might be right. I should probably double check this because I was working on this pretty late last night. So maybe it was.
I'll defer to you. I think you're probably the one that's right, but it was close, and that's like. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to judge it by today's standards because, like you said, it was such a different game. A lot of times, quarterbacks throughout the 80s, anyways, successful season was 2,700 yards. You had the Dan Marinos that were hitting 3,000, but it was a run first league. Yeah. Thank goodness for the Steelers. They went out. They eventually got Franco Harris. And no, Terry Bradshaw, I'm sorry to any Steelers fans. I do not mean to be dismissive of Terry Bradshaw. He is a legendary quarterback. Yeah. I do feel like you put him on a team like the Bears that did not progress as quickly as the Steelers did. And maybe the Steelers progressed because of Bradshaw, devil's advocate to my argument. But I'm not sure he was the difference maker, I guess is where I was going.
Totally fair. And I also found out that they won a coin flip in the 1975 draft for the right to draft Walter Payton. So I guess, you win some, you lose some, you end up with
those coin flips.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So what is your number 2 what if here?
So my number 2 was and I had notes here, but so I believe it was the 2000 I forget the year actually. It was the year that Mark Trestman was hired as head coach of the Bears. The person that left the interview process thinking that he was going to be offered the job and was excited about accepting the job was Bruce Arians,
Mhm.
who later went on to take later that offseason went on to take the Tampa Bay Buccaneers job, and the rest is history. He I'm sorry. He took the Arizona Cardinals job and
Yeah,
then
where
eventually
he
moved
had
on
some
to the
success there as well. Yeah.
yes, and led one of the more successful offenses of the era. And I just think about how overmatched Mark Trestman seemed his whole tenure as the Bears, and I think about what Jay Cutler would have looked like in Bruce Arians' vertical offense. The one thing Cutler had was a cannon for an arm, good mobility. Uh, he maybe had some issues with throwing to the wrong team from time to time, but
He's another high interception guy.
yes. But I feel like with the track record that Bruce Arians went on to have as a head coach compared to Mark Trestman, who, again, this goes back to two things. One, the Bears not being run. By this time, they were firmly being run by the McCaskey family. And Michael McCaskey and George McCaskey are, admittedly, they will come out and tell you, we're not football people. We don't watch football. We don't understand football. We're businessmen. Every now and then we get an angry phone call from Virginia McCaskey, who's George Halas's father, and their mother, and they'll come back and say, Mom's not happy. We got to make some changes. So anyways, they chose Mark Trestman in part because of you look at every head coach that the Bears have chose since Mike Ditka. It was because Mike Ditka was loud and stomped his feet and swore at the reporters and was fun to watch. And they said, we don't want any more of that. We don't want our coach swearing on TV. We don't want, which goes against the idea of hiring Buddy Ryan too, because he famously punched Kevin Gilbride on the sideline of the Houston Oilers. That was his offensive coordinator. But yeah, so having these loud personality coaches is not something the Bears are about. And
so they hire Mark Trestman, who's, quiet, bookish type, looks more like a college professor than an NFL coach. I mean, I know they did have the number 2 offense, I think, his first year, but It was weird. I mean, all of a sudden they just had like the worst defense in the NFL for some reason, which obviously is not something you associate with the Bears. And I think Arians would have been a great hire for football reasons, obviously, but he just seems like a Bears coach. He's kind of loud. He's a tough guy. He's got tons of experience. I think he was one of the older coaching hires, but he was like this boisterous personality, like Ditka almost, but
sure.
Without the cigar and the sunglasses. Well, he did have the sunglasses and the driving hat. So
it takes it seems to me anyways, it takes a certain amount of charisma to be a head coach. And Mark Trestman wasn't really screaming charisma. Where Bruce Arians is a character. Yeah, he's a guy that people want to play for. People still call and ask, players in the NFL that have played with him still call and ask his opinion on things. Other coaches still, hey, Bruce, what do you think of this? Steve Young was the only one that was really upset when Mark Trestman didn't pan out, and he famously blamed Jay Cutler for it, saying, hey, Mark Trestman's the best coach I've ever had. It's the player's fault, not the coach's fault. But then Mark Trestman went on to be a terrible offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens after being fired by the Bears. So I don't know. I kind of seem to blame.
Kind of works out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he was a pretty good coordinator right before this. And I think we've seen a lot of guys.
90s.
Yeah. A lot of guys, they're good coordinators, not so good head coaches. And then they go back to coordinating, but by then maybe the game has passed them by, the style, whatever it is. So,
and I believe Arians would have had some success, which would have led to some stability, which the Cutler era was wasted by instability. I mean, Jay Cutler, with all his flaws, he had 6 offensive coordinators in 10 seasons. And every time you get a new offensive coordinator, it's like having to learn a different language. That's a lot to expect from anybody to succeed under those circumstances.
So before I jump to my number 2, just an aside, do you think Jay Cutler is the most talented quarterback to ever play for the Chicago Bears?
I
Not the best or the greatest, but
no,
just like
no,
the
no.
most
Yeah, I get definitely get the distinction. I would have
yeah.
said hands down yes. Justin Fields may have that now, but talent wise,
Mhm.
but um, heard people say that that Cutler had the strongest arm they'd ever seen, and he was drafted by the Denver Broncos and who had John Elway there. So that's yeah.
It's a
And
maybe.
he had underrated mobility. I mean, he could move. He just wasn't going to take off and scramble a lot. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think
I
physically he
mean,
was very gifted.
yeah, you made a conference championship game with Jay
Yeah.
Cutler, so I mean, obviously the success was there. So my number two, we'll take it back to the 80s. So you talked about the 1986 season where they chose Mike Ditka over Buddy Ryan, but this is more to do with the on-field situation rather than the coaching situation. So obviously coming off the 85 season where they have one of the best defenses in the NFL, NFL history, I should say, the Bears come back in the 1986 season and their defense is just as good. They still have the same talent, like you said. They weren't, they didn't have the same defensive coordinator, but obviously the philosophies and the schemes, all that is still there. And my what if is basically, what if Jim McMahon's season didn't end early in 1986? It was one of the more dirtier plays in NFL history where a defensive lineman from the Packers named Charles Martin basically like body slammed or suplexed, whatever you want to call it, Jim McMahon after the whistle. And back then they were playing on the not even the AstroTurf, just the AstroTurf.
It was like green cement basically back then.
Yeah, basically, right? Where you're not even wearing cleats at that point. You're just wearing tennis shoes. And basically, I know he doesn't get a lot of credit for leading that Bears defense or that Bears team to a Super Bowl, but he was by far the best option on that team. And even in that Super Bowl run, he still had 700 yards and 3 touchdowns, and more importantly, no turnovers in those 3 games leading up to the Super Bowl. So I think the big what if is that if Jim McMahon is able to stay healthy, I do think that the Bears are able to repeat in 86 and they don't become, it's not quite a dynasty. Back-to-back is not quite a dynasty, but it's obviously much more memorable and you get a lot more, say, credit from NFL historians and NFL fans for winning back-to-back. So do you think if Jim McMahon was healthy, you guys would have repeated in 86?
Yeah, I think that's very possible. Now when you take the quarterback play that they had, who I think Steve Fuller and Mike Tomczak, I could be wrong about Tomczak, were the
You're
ones
right.
that stepped in.
Doug
And
Flutie
Tomczak
too.
ended up being a fine. What's that?
And Doug Flutie too.
Oh yeah, he was in the picture by then. Okay. Yeah, they took him in the supplemental draft, which was different. But yeah, I think I think that they could have definitely competed more than they did. So I'd say that's a very realistic possibility. There's something about McMahon, not the most physically gifted quarterback, but he was one of those guys. He was one of the first ones I remember hearing about that used to work out in the weight room with the offensive linemen. And when after a touchdown was scored, he'd go headbutt everybody in the lineup. I mean, they loved playing for him. And when he stepped into the huddle, it really just brought a different level to just emotionally to the team. And the bond that was there between McMahon and Peyton, Jared Payton is on X now, and he calls him Uncle Jimmy because they were that close. And I think he might have been enough emotionally to carry that offense, and the defense did its job. So, I mean, it's and there's just a famous game. It was the season before, actually. It was the Super Bowl season when he missed the first half of the Minnesota Vikings game, and they jumped out to a 21-0 lead. And he wasn't medically cleared to play, but he was in Ditka's ear the whole first half going, put me in, coach, put me in, coach. And finally, Ditka had it. He said, get in there. And his first throw was the other thing McMahon did, and this is what drove Ditka crazy, and they end up loving each other now. But he was the guy that would go into the huddle and say, all right, that's the call they called? Yeah, we're not doing that. and that's what happened in that Vikings game. First play, he gets into the huddle and he says, yeah, no, that play sucks. We're not running that play. And he ends up audibling dropping a bomb to I think it was Willie Galt. Anyways, they ended up winning that game. His first three passes were touchdowns, I think. Or I believe that was the case. It was definitely the first 3 drives were touchdowns, but I believe it was the first 3 passes were touchdown passes in that game.
Mhm.
It was just, he had a magic about him when he was in that part of his career before his body really started to hinder his performances.
Yeah, there's something to be said about the like intangibles that a quarterback brings, even if, like you said, he's not the most physically gifted. There's like a bravado, a confidence that's infectious, right? If you're in the huddle with a young Doug Flutie, you're probably not feeling as confident as you would, obviously, with Jim McMahon, who you've kind of been through the battles with, the wars with. Like you said, the guy that's lifting weights with you in the weight room, and just one of the guys type of player. So at the very least, they do have a chance to repeat because they obviously had a Super Bowl caliber defense, and they were, I think, 14-2 that year, despite the carousel at quarterbacks. So
there were some tough teams that year, though. The Giants that ended up winning that year, the Redskins, the 49ers were tough. The Joe Montana 49ers were always tough. So, I mean, I don't think anything's given, but I think that they stood a much better chance.
Yeah, when you have an elite defense, I think you always have a chance. So,
yes.
What is your number 3 and final pick for the what ifs?
So, and I really should have prefaced all of these with the fact that, and this is something that hopefully, if you watch the Nonsense Zone podcast, you'll see I'm an idiot. So, okay. I mean, a lot of this stuff, especially saying that Mike Ditka wasn't a good coach, is stuff that's going to be very unpopular. Just keep in mind that I'm stupid. So, you can't get mad at a dumb guy. So, this, I know I've seen the comment forums on different articles and stuff. So I know that this isn't a popular opinion, but what if the Bears had drafted Patrick Mahomes instead of Mitch Trubisky?
It's a recent
I'm going to say not. Sure. I'm going to say not much different would have happened.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So here's where. Yes. So first of all, look at that draft. Leading up to that draft, all of the draft prognosticators had Mitch Trubisky listed as their number 1 quarterback. It was really. Yeah. Is it going to be Mitch Trubisky or is it going to be Deshaun Watson? And it was like, oh, we all really like Patrick Mahomes, but he's a project. He's not going to be good for another few years. He's very raw. He's got the physical skill set.
Yeah, he's a system guy. Texas Tech, they put up video game numbers in the Big 12, whatever. So, yeah, I could see that.
So the people that really chastised Ryan Pace for, that was horrible. What was horrible was that he traded up from 3 to 2 when he probably didn't have to do that. But taking Mitch, who everybody was really high on. I really, really blame Matt Nagy for the downfall of Mitch Trubisky. And I think as evidence to that, Matt Nagy is Patrick Mahomes' offensive coordinator right now. And Patrick Mahomes is having the worst season of his career. And it's because Matt Nagy is a very charismatic guy, and I think he could have been a good head coach if he had let his offensive coordinator call the plays. He doesn't have the first clue about rhythm, about getting your offense going. So many games, even the 2018 season where he won Coach of the Year, I'd be watching the game, run it on first down, get like a 3-yard gain, then get like a 2-yard gain, and you got 3 and 5. You've made some progress, and then you'd call like a triple reverse or something like that. That would, now we're, his gadget plays, horrible times that he called them, was a huge precursor to what we saw of what turned into just terrible game calling. I remember near the end when things were bad between Mitch and Nagy, and he was struggling, and they were playing against a really good Saints defense, and they knew he was struggling, and he still called 42 pass plays in a close game. You've got good running backs, run the ball. You've got David Montgomery. You've got Herbert wasn't there yet, but they had a strong running game. And then he famously made the comment, well, they didn't hire me to run out of the I formation. And then a couple games later, you could tell somebody talked to him because he was running the I out of the I formation and they were running the ball really well. It
Yeah.
just, and he just trust the system, trust the system. And it was, well, A, it was Andy Reid's system, not yours. And B, you don't really know how to run it. So I just feel like a young quarterback, he just totally trashed his confidence. Not saying that Mitch Trubisky will never, under the best circumstances, he would have never been as good as Patrick Mahomes is now. But I think he would have ruined Patrick Mahomes too.
That's a fair point. What if it was Deshaun Watson instead of Patrick Mahomes, who was, a two-time national champ, I think, a much more, off-field discretions aside and current level of play aside. At one point, I think he started as a rookie. He, was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL for a while. Would he have been Nagy proof?
I think he would have been I think he was more polished and more pro ready than any of the other quarterbacks. I don't know. I honestly don't know if anybody could have been, again, I made this comment that it's all in the team that drafts you. And I just feel like the Bears were, for a quarterback, the worst possible location for a quarterback to get drafted during that time frame, because and really Ryan Pace shares some blame. Again, not a problem moving on from Jay Cutler, but then as long as you have somebody better in mind, and his answer to that was Mike Glennon, and just horrible quarterback. Apparently a great teammate. Coaches love him.
Good
but
guy.
every time you got onto the playing field, he was awful. And so he starts the season, and then Mitch comes in, and that was during the John Fox era. But that's where I'm saying Pace shares some blame. I don't know. I don't know that.
So no
Deshaun
quarterback
Watson
is Nagy. I guess the bigger question I should ask you is, why can't a quarterback succeed in Chicago? Why have they not, in the 100 years of the franchise?
We have hope now.
Yeah,
we have hope.
Do you believe
now
in Justin Fields? You believe in Justin Fields?
I like Justin Fields. I don't know if
Okay.
I think he's probably done. I think this is probably his last year there.
Okay.
Could be wrong. I think the reason that we have hope now is we have a team president that is a football guy.
Okay.
So, Ted Phillips finally retired again. Probably a great businessman. Doesn't know the first thing about football. He would hire committees of retired general managers to interview his head coaching candidates because he didn't know anything about football. So Kevin Warren is former SEC president, our chairman, and he has a long history of success in football. I think that maybe now moving forward, we have a chance. Again, really, when it looked like what were the Bears looking for? Somebody that's mild-mannered and not going to get us in the headlines by the words he says seem to be their top criteria.
For sure. So we'll come back to this because I do want to ask you, what's next for the Bears. But so I'll go with my number 3. This is a more recent one. This is Jay Cutler related. So the question is, what if Jay Cutler does not get hurt in that NFC title game? I believe it's 2011. So, they're playing the Green Bay Packers in Chicago because the Bears did win the division. I remember very vividly that Cutler was out of the game for some reason. He wasn't in the blue tent. I don't think they had the blue tent back then. And he was just kind of walking around the sideline with his helmet off. We didn't really know what was going on. I was like, this guy quit on the team? Like, what was happening?
That was the narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then we end up finding out that he had sprained his MCL, and the team, ended up playing Caleb Haney at the time. They lose, I believe, 21-14 to Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. Again, a team that they had beaten earlier in the year. They had split that series and won the division. And I do think that, with the team that they had a elite defense. They still had the DNA of that other Super Bowl defense with Urlacher and Briggs and Israel Donajay. They added Julius Peppers. So it was just like littered with Hall of Famers. And I really think that, the what if is if Cutler was healthy, they obviously have a legit shot at winning an NFC title game at home against a team they had already beaten earlier in the year. And then they would have been a great matchup for the Steelers, who were pretty good on offense. They had the number 1 defense. So I think it would have been a really fascinating Super Bowl and one that I think, the Bears would have gotten a legit chance in. What do you think?
Was that Steelers Seahawks, or was that Steelers Cardinals that ended up being?
That ended up being Steelers Packers. So that was the year that
Steelers Packers. Sorry. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it was 2010, the 2010 season, and that was the
Sure.
one that Aaron Rodgers ended up winning. It was a pretty good game, but
Sure. Yeah, they could have made a Super Bowl run with Cutler. Again, Cutler, he was a gunslinger, so who knows if he would have had a costly turnover or something. I love Jay Cutler. I feel like he got a lot of blame that he deserved, and I think he got a lot of blame that he didn't deserve. Again, when I go back to all the different offenses he had to learn in such a short period of time. Actually, I'll say Adam Gase made the comment when he was hired as the offensive coordinator under John Fox and he had just finished coaching Peyton Manning to a Super Bowl the year before. He made the comment that Jay Cutler was, football-wise, the smartest player he'd ever been around. Which,
high praise.
Wow, this guy just coached Peyton Manning, so that's saying something. But at the same time, man, he loved that arm of his so much that I could fit this anywhere, and that got him in trouble sometimes. So it was really hard to count on Jay Cutler.
The term for that is arm arrogance. I've heard it.
Yes.
For guys like him, Brett Favre, in recent years, Josh Allen, I've heard that arm arrogance being thrown around. So, yeah, I think it is fair that you couldn't completely count on Jay Cutler, but I do think, obviously, if he's healthy, then
my bias is going to jump in and say yes. We
okay.
We had a quarterback. Caleb Haney wasn't beating anybody. We had a quarterback. We were close in that game without Cutler at the end. So yeah, we could have gone to the Super Bowl, and I feel like we definitely, that Steelers team was good, but they weren't, they weren't a team that we were going to look at. And
I think they had the 20th ranked offense or something in the NFL. So it would have been an interesting matchup of two elite level defenses, because as I said, the Steelers did have the number one defense in the NFL that year.
So that's like James Harrison and Yep.
Incredible. Troy Polamalu in his prime, those guys. So that's it for the three what ifs. Do you have any honorable mentions you want to talk about real quick?
Mainly, yeah. I mean, I've harped on this, the whole show, but it's, if they had gone to a football person to lead the team earlier. Again, the closest thing that they had to a football person was Virginia McCaskey, and she was kind of hands off. She only called when she was upset about the lack of effort or something like that. And we didn't have a general manager through most of the 90s, I don't think. And so when you don't have football people running the front office and you don't have a general manager, it's like, no wonder we're, from Super Bowl, it just was down. And we had a couple of spike years, but you got to have people that know what they're doing running the show now. Again, hopefully Kevin Warren can at least lay the groundwork for something. Yeah. So the other thing is it breaks my heart that they're going to be playing in a dome in the near future.
Is that confirmed? They're moving out to the burbs?
Well, it's not confirmed that they're going to make the Arlington Heights thing work, but it is confirmed that they want a dome. The McCaskey family wants to be able to host WrestleMania. They want to be able to host concerts. They want to be able to, make money off their venue all winter. To do that, you're going to need a dome.
I think that's the future of the NFL. I mean, the Vikings have it. The Lions playing the dome. I mean, it's the NFC North, supposed to be the frozen tundra, and it might just end up being like, I don't know, Lambeau and Arrowhead. Maybe even I think even Buffalo. Maybe they'll do that at some point.
Oh, but Buffalo is building a new stadium, and it's open air. That's exciting to me. Like, there's not many new open air stadiums being built. Mm-hmm. So that's exciting. Especially, I know how bad the snow is in Buffalo. So the fact that they're like, no, we don't care. We're keeping it open. Man, I wish the Bears would think like that.
I have my thoughts on that, but that's for a separate podcast.
Sure.
So my honorable mention is just the double doink game in 2018. You talked about Matt Nagy. That was when he won Coach of the Year. They won the division with Mitch Trubisky. Trubisky was a Pro Bowler that year. They had the number one defense. I don't think they would have made it to the Super Bowl or won the Super Bowl. I think they would have still had to travel to LA to play the Rams, and then to New Orleans, one of those two.
Sure.
And they had already beaten LA earlier that year, but I think asking Trubisky to go into either of those places, especially New Orleans at that time, I think would have been a little bit too much to ask. But they did have the number one defense, so anything is possible. Defense travels, basically.
That defense was special, but even if they made it to the Super Bowl, I didn't see them beating the Patriots.
That was the other thing. Mitch Trubisky against
Bill Belichick.
Mitch Trubisky
they played earlier that season.
Matt Nagy. Oh,
yeah,
did they?
Played,
okay.
No. They either played earlier that season or they played the next season. And Belichick said right before the game, we're going to make Trubisky beat us throwing the ball, because at that time, Mitch was running the ball really well.
Yeah,
and that's something that people don't tend to remember, how strong of a runner he was. But
I remember that. He was a hell of an athlete. He just stopped doing that for some reason. Maybe he just didn't want to take the hits anymore.
I think it was an injury. I honestly think that that, and anytime a quarterback loses some confidence, we'll see. He's playing for the Steelers the next couple of weeks. We'll see if he can bounce back, but I don't think so. I think he's a career backup now.
Yeah, we're recording this on December 5th, and he's probably, I think, going to start the rest of the year for them. So let's, real quick before we wrap up, we kind of touched on this a little bit of what's next for the Bears. Right now, Justin Fields has one more year left on his contract. If the season continues as many of us expect, they will be picking, in the top 3, and they have the Panthers pick, who are probably going to have the first pick in the NFL. So gut feeling, do they draft a quarterback and move on from Fields, or, what do you think happens next?
I feel like, again, I don't have a huge problem with Eberflus, but I think he's out because that record is hard to justify. Even though the defense has been really picking it up. So I think if you get a new head coach, you're going to get a new quarterback too. I think they're going to want the coach to pick their own quarterback. I think if they decide to keep Eberflus, I think that they'll keep Fields.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, and I like Fields. I tell you, I find myself swearing at the TV an awful lot when he's holding the ball too long and running in the wrong direction. But man, he is fun. He reminds me of Randall Cunningham. Just dazzling skill set.
Yeah,
but doesn't win a lot of games.
Yeah, exactly. He's an elite athlete. I don't know if he has the quarterback part down, just yet. I think my gut is telling me this regime, this team president, this GM, whatever, they didn't draft him, so they're not really married to him. I think getting rid of him and getting another quarterback gives them a longer leash for next year. Even if they keep Eberflus, I think they can, if they get
Caleb, a salary cap. You have to play the salary cap game. And starting over with a rookie contract, especially when the defense is starting to show promise, that would be huge.
Yeah. Hopefully they get the next kid, an offensive line and some weapons. So
yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. So all right, man. Well, thank you so much for your insight. Where I know you're still working on your podcast, but do you have a social media or something that you want to share with folks so they can check in with you?
We are on Facebook. Look up the Nonsense Zone on Facebook. I think I've posted one GIF or wherever where I'm just looking at the screen and saying I'm trying to start a marketing ploy of nonsense is coming. So there's just one post of me doing that. So Facebook, Nonsense Zone. I believe we're on Instagram and Threads also. Okay. So, and we hope to start, you know what? My production values are going to stink. You're going to look at it and think, wow, this show sucks. But hopefully once you start seeing the content, you'll stick around because we're just going to roll with it. We're going to roll it right out early in January. Test shows be damned and see what happens.
Awesome. Yeah, well, hopefully I can come on as a guest sometime. It sounds like a lot of fun.
I would love that.
Very cool.
And
as for us,
thank you for having me on here. And I'm sorry for rambling like I do. It's kind of what I do.
No, you have a ton of insight. That's why I love having fans of the actual team, because you guys have a lot of like inside information from the beat writers that you follow, and just the being so close to the team that me and another Raiders fan or something wouldn't have about the Bears. So thank you for that. As for the 4040 Vision podcast, thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure to leave us a review and subscribe where you're listening to this podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple, YouTube, whatever it is. Make sure to check us out on all the major social media platforms at 4040 Vision Pod. Thanks, everybody.